1941, the Soviet Union. For months, the Soviet leadership refuses to heed warnings from the Western powers of a German troop buildup along its western border. Thus, when on the 22nd of June 1941, Germany and its Axis partners invade the Soviet Union, they achieve almost complete tactical surprise. Much of the existing Soviet Air Force is destroyed on the ground, and the Soviet armies are initially overwhelmed. As the German army advances deep into Soviet territory, the SS and police units follow the troops. The first to arrive are the Einsatzgruppen, the Nazi mobile death squads, who will conduct the mass shootings of Jews, communists, and other persons deemed to be dangerous to establishing long-term German rule on Soviet territory. On the 24th of October 1941, the Germans capture Kharkov, one of the largest industrial centers in the Soviet Union. While on the eve of the occupation, the city's population is around 1.5 million. Less than 200,000 will be alive by the time of Kharkov's liberation in August 1943. Among the German personnel in the city is a man who specializes in the loading of women and children into gas vans and extorting from Soviet civilians false statements by means of torture. His name is Reinhard Retzlaff. Reinhard Retzlaff was born in 1907 in Berlin, then part of the German Empire. He obtained secondary education, and when Adolf Hitler came into power in January 1933, Retzlaff was 25 years old. However, unlike millions of Germans, he did not join the Nazi Party. Since the 1920s, core policies of the Nazi movement included the destruction of the Soviet Union by military force, the permanent elimination of the perceived communist threat to Germany, and the seizure of prime land within Soviet borders as Lebensraum, meaning living space, for long-term German settlement. Hitler believed that Germany had to conquer these lands and populate them with Germans in order for the German race to win the constant battle for survival between the races. The Nazis maintained that Jews had created Bolshevik communism and were using it to gain world domination. Consequently, they often refer to communism as Judeo-Bolshevism, which claimed that communism was a Jewish plot designed at German expense. The Nazis viewed conquering the Soviet Union as a necessary step towards destroying Jewish influence in the world. They also believed that the Slavs and other ethnic groups in the Soviet Union were racially inferior and by nature enemies of the German race. For the first 6 years of Nazi rule, Nazi propaganda viciously attacked the Soviet Union, and in private, Hitler spoke repeatedly of a future conflict. Nevertheless, in 1939, Nazi Germany embarked on a temporary strategic policy of cooperation with the Soviet Union. This temporary reversal reflected Hitler's tactical decision to secure his eastern flank while Germany destroyed Poland and defeated Britain and France. Before the outbreak of war, Reinhard Retzlaff was the assistant manager of distribution for a newspaper in Frankfurt. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Poland found itself fighting a two-front war when it was invaded by the Soviet Union from the east on the 17th of September. Warsaw officially surrendered to the Germans on the 28th of September, and one day later, in accordance with a secret protocol to their non-aggression pact, Germany and the Soviet Union partitioned Poland. On Sunday, the 22nd of June 1941, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, its ally in the war against Poland. The Battle of Kharkov began on the 20th of October 1941, when the Germans had advanced to the western edge of the city, and 4 days later, they were able to take control of what was until then one of the largest Soviet industrial centers, located in northeastern Ukraine. By this time, however, most of Kharkov's industrial facilities had been evacuated or rendered useless by Soviet authorities. Following the battle's conclusion, Kharkov experienced its first occupation during the war, which lasted until the 16th of February 1943. German troops in the city acted under the authority of the Reichenau-order, which supported Nazi genocidal policies and advocated for punishment against the so-called subhuman species of Jews and the extermination of Jewish Bolshevism in Europe. The order paved the way for the mass murder of Jews and encouraged German soldiers to murder Jewish civilians on the Eastern Front. All Jews were henceforth to be treated as partisans, and commanders were directed that they be either summarily shot or handed over to the Einsatzgruppe and execution squads. Women and children were to be shot as well, in order to not have any avengers remain. The German terror in Kharkov started shortly after the battle, when several corpses of Soviet commanders were displayed on balconies to instill fear in those who remained. Over the following months, members of the Sonderkommando 4A, commanded by SS Standartenführer Paul Blobel of Einsatzgruppe C, murdered an estimated 16,000 to 30,000 local residents, mainly Jews. Notably, on the 15th of December 1941, when the temperature was minus 15 degrees Celsius or 5 degrees Fahrenheit, around 15,000 Jews were shot in the ravine of WWII Yar. To save bullets, children were thrown into pits alive, with the expectation that they would quickly freeze to death. The killings continued throughout January using a gas van, which was a truck re-equipped as a mobile gas chamber modified to hold 50 people. The vehicle drove around the city, slowly killing those trapped inside with carbon monoxide emitted from the vehicle itself and channeled into an airtight compartment. The victims died from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and asphyxiation. Reinhard Retzlaff served in Kharkov as an official of the 560th Group of German Secret Field Police, and he specialized in the loading of women and children into the gas vans with the help of clubs and rifle butts. Once loaded into the vehicles, the victims, the elderly, women, and children, were suffocated to death. Retzlaff later confirmed the existence of gas vans, saying, "In the beginning of March 1942, while paying a visit of inspection to the Kharkov prison, I saw a large dark grey closed automobile in the courtyard. I asked a member of the Kharkov command of the security service called Kaminsky, with whom I was acquainted, what this closed automobile was used for, as I knew that people had been taken to be shot in open trucks. Kaminsky said that this was a method of exterminating Russians, which saved a lot of time, and what is more, all the unpleasantness connected with wholesale shooting. He went on to explain that the exhaust gas from the engine entered the body of the van, and after a short time poisoned the occupants. After this, all that remained was to unload the dead and bury them." The purpose of the van was kept to a strict secret, nevertheless some of the prisoners evidently knew what it was used for. Some of the prisoners offered resistance when the gas van was loaded, but they were beaten with clubs in the butts of rifles and pistols. I personally took part in the loading into the gas van twice, in March and July 1942. On each occasion, about 20 persons were loaded. Other officials of the secret police also took part in it. The day I was there, a frightful scene occurred. The women wept loudly. Some of them dropped to their knees begging to be sent back to prison. They were all murdered. As Retzlaff later admitted, he also took part in the burning of the bodies of those who had been killed. His other task in the secret police was to extort false statements from Soviet civilians by means of torture, plucking out their hair and torturing them with needles. Among the victims were also women and children. Retzlaff later recalled, "Every person detained by the military authorities and sent to the secret field police for examination was first of all beaten up. If a prisoner gave the evidence we needed, the beatings were discontinued, while those who refused to give evidence were further beaten, and this frequently resulted in their death. This meant that if someone did not confess, he was beaten to death, and if he did, he was shot." Retzlaff later recalled what happened in the town of Derhachi, which was located 12 kilometers or 7 miles from Kharkov. He said, "The 20 women were taken in turn to the interrogation room. Because none of them confessed, brutal measures were applied. We threw them on a bench, stripped them down naked, and beat them with sticks. All the 20 innocent women were shot on my orders." During his stay in German-occupied Ukraine, Retzlaff also took part in the killing of civilians, which occurred outside Kharkov. For instance, in the city of Poltava, he burnt a mother with her 3 children alive. Kharkov was temporarily retaken by the Red Army in February 1943, and then again by the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, in April of the same year. In the spring of 1943, Soviet authorities had already discovered mass graves of the victims, mostly Jews. By the time that Kharkov was liberated for good in August 1943, virtually no Jews survived in the city. However, there were 3 Germans and 1 Soviet collaborator who did face justice for the crimes committed in Kharkov. In December 1943, the Kharkov trial began, during which 4 men, Reinhard Retzlaff, Wilhelm Langheld, Hans Ritz, and Mikhail Bulanov, were accused of participating in the murders of Soviet citizens. Bulanov was also charged with treason for collaborating with the Germans. Spectators in the courtroom included people whose families had been murdered, and many witnesses were called. Every statement in the trial was translated into German, and each defendant was represented by counsel. All 3 Germans were charged with playing a direct part in the mass and brutal extermination of peaceful Soviet people by the use of gas fans, and also with having taken a personal part in mass shootings, hangings, burning, plunder, and outrages on Soviet people. All the accused pleaded guilty, with Retzlaff saying, "I plead guilty to all the crimes I have committed upon the orders of my immediate command. If I had not obeyed these orders, I would have been put in the same position as my victims." During the trial, defense counsel's strategy amounted to arguing that the accused were following orders. The prosecution acknowledged that the men were indeed acting on superior orders, but rejected this as a sufficient defense. During the trial, the prosecutor asked Reinhard Retzlaff if there was any occasion when cases were trumped up and evidence was faked, to which Retzlaff responded, "Yes, all this happened, and rather frequently. One may say that this was quite a normal procedure." The trial concluded on the 18th of December 1943, and the 4 men were sentenced to death. All the accused, however, filed a petition for clemency. While Wilhelm Langheld stated that he had personally beaten women to death, but pointed out that he was not the only one, saying, "The entire German army is like that," Retzlaff's plea was different. He said, "I want to open the eyes of the German people to the deeds of the fascist invaders. For that reason I ask that I be pardoned and be given the opportunity of returning to Germany to put my desire into action." However, their petitions were rejected. Their execution, which took place in Kharkov City Square on the 19th of December 1943 at 11 a.m., was held publicly and became a theater of horror. Some foreign correspondent said that 50,000 people witnessed the hangings in the snow-covered public square. American journalist Edmund Stevens described the execution, saying, "It was all over in a few moments. The defendants were hoisted into the back of 4 open trucks and stood on stools. Then, the nooses were looped around their necks. There was no blindfolding. During the preliminaries, 3 of the 4 prisoners had to be propped up. Bulanov had fainted. Ritz and Retzlaff had turned pasty white. They drooled at the mouths, and their knees gave way. Only Langheld, the old soldier, remained stiff as a ramrod throughout, never once flinching. Once the nooses had been adjusted, at a signal, the trucks pulled away, and the 4 men were left dangling and kicking in midair. After the hanging, loud cheers broke from the crowd. The execution of the 4 men was performed by short drop method hanging, in which the body does not fall from too great a height. This resulted in a torturous death by strangulation, which lasted anywhere from 10 to 20 long minutes. The Kharkov trial, which sentenced the 4 men to death by hanging, was the first time that German personnel had been tried for war crimes by the Allies during and after World War II. There were no tears shed for the Nazi murderers. Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.